It was just another day with black coffee and a porch that creaks louder than my knees. 66 doesn't feel like anything. It's not a round number, not old enough to feel wise, not young enough to pretend you're not sore in the mornings. It just lands. Somewhere in the middle of a Tuesday, and a memory you can't quite reach. I started the morning the way I always do, in silence. The old kettle groaned before it whistled, like it was warning me. I poured the black coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one with the faded magnolia on the side. The porch creaked under my steps as I eased into the swing, pulled the blanket across my lap, and watched the wind lose its battle with the dead leaves. The sun hadn't properly risen, just smeared pale gold across the tops of the trees, like it had forgotten how to shine. The crossword lay untouched beside me. I used to fill it out every morning. Now I just read the clues and wait to see if any answers come without effort. Most don't. No calls, no cards, no sound, except the wind and the hollow ache behind my ribs that always gets louder in August. 4 birthdays ago was the last time I heard his voice. Corwin. My son. My only child. He didn't call then, either. But that year, I still checked the phone every hour. This year, I didn't expect anything. Just wanted the day to pass like a soft shadow, unnoticed. The silence was deep, the kind that settles around you like a second coat. And then the knock. Just once. Not a sharp rap. Not the impatient rhythm of the mailman, or the cheerful double tap from neighbors. Just a single knock, followed by silence. Then the faint scuff of retreating footsteps on gravel. I waited a moment, unsure why. Maybe part of me hoped it was a mistake. A package meant for someone else. A misdelivered kindness. But when I opened the door, there it was. A box plain brown paper, carefully taped at the edges. A single strip of blue ribbon wrapped once around the middle and tied in a knot. No curls, no flourishes, just precise. I didn't need to read the name to know who it was from. I would have known it with my eyes closed. Corwin always wrote like he was designing blueprints. Block letters, tight kerning, no wasted curves. Always in blue ink. My name was scrawled dead center on the top. Not Mom, not Mother, just Idalia Vance. He used my full name, as if we were strangers sharing a business transaction. I stood there in my slippers, the porch breeze lifting my robe just enough to chill my ankles. My hand hovered over the box, then pulled back. The ribbon was taut. It looked intentional. I carried it inside like it might bite. The kitchen was still warm from the morning's coffee, now gone cold in the pot. I set the box down on the table, its sharp corners unsettling against the scuffed wood. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I reheated the coffee, out of habit more than desire. The microwave hummed. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the package like it might speak first. 4 years. No apology, no explanations. Not when my husband passed, not when I mailed the final legal documents. Not even when I sent the photo of the dogwood tree Corwin planted as a child, the one that had finally bloomed after all those barren seasons. But now, a box. On my birthday. I reached forward, slowly peeling the ribbon away, careful not to tear it. The paper came off in deliberate folds, the tape lifting with just the right amount of resistance. Inside, a smaller white box. Clean. Unmarked. Tucked under the lid, I caught a flash of tissue paper. I didn't open it further. Not yet. I pushed the box aside and cradled the mug in both hands. The coffee tasted burnt. I drank it anyway. Outside, the porch swing moved slightly, though there was no breeze. Inside the box, there might be kindness. There might be poison. Or maybe something worse, hope. I whispered my name under my breath as I stared at his handwriting. Not for reassurance, but to remind myself that I still existed. Idalia Vance. 66. Forgotten. Remembered. Not sure which one hurts more. The box stayed on the table, unopened, as I cleaned the sink and straightened the towels and wiped down the already wiped countertops. But I could feel it watching me, pressing its shape into the room like a question I didn't ask. Eventually, I sat down again and opened it. He always wrote like a math teacher, sharp, unforgiving, all angles. The white box sat on my kitchen table like it had been there for years instead of minutes. I didn't open it. Not yet. I'd removed the brown paper slowly, folding each edge, as if neatness would make it less personal. But the moment I saw the white lid beneath the tissue wrapping, something shifted. My hands had started shaking, not visibly, just enough that I noticed the way the ribbon fluttered from my fingers when I let go of it. Corwin always tied knots that didn't come undone by accident. I pushed the box aside, just an inch, enough distance to reclaim my breath. I stood up, walked to the sink, turned on the faucet like I needed something to do. My coffee mug, empty and cold, waited patiently by the stove. I filled it again, no cream, no sugar the way I used to drink it when Corwin was young, before everything required softening. The clock ticked above the pantry. I've never liked that sound. It reminds me of waiting rooms. The box didn't move, but it pulled at me, like gravity. I circled the table once, then sat down and folded my hands again, elbows off the table, back straight. Old habits from an older version of myself, the one who believed appearances kept families together. I didn't want to open it because I knew what came next. If it was nothing just cookies and a note, then it would feel like bait. If it was more, something tender, something regretful, then it would tear a hole where I'd finally stitched myself closed. So I waited. I sipped coffee that didn't taste like anything. I let the afternoon light crawl across the floor. And I remembered. I remembered the last time he'd written to me. Not a birthday, not a holiday. Just a single email, sent 4 years ago, subject line. Regarding the will. No greeting, no warmth, just numbers, corrections, grievances typed out like a spreadsheet. You favored sentiment over logic, he wrote. You always do. And maybe I did. Maybe that's why I left the garden bench to him. The one his father built. The one Corwin never sat on, but that I thought he'd want someday. He didn't. He wanted the stalks. I stared at the box again. The white of it was too clean, like a lie told by omission. I reached out and let my fingers rest on the edge. Cool to the touch. Sharp corners. He would have liked that. Corwin never liked softness. He tolerated hugs like obligations, smiled only when it made him appear correct, and polished his sentences until no emotion could find a foothold. He always wrote like a math teacher. Sharp, unforgiving, all angles. Even his childhood thank you notes were stiff. Dear Grandma, thank you for the sweater. The wool is 80% warm. He was 9 when he wrote that. Eventually, I couldn't sit still anymore. The quiet began to buzz. I opened the lid. Inside, tissue paper, delicately folded, like someone had taken care, real care. And nestled beneath cookies, a dozen at least, maybe more, each one different, no repeats. Decorated with such precision it made my chest tighten. Blue flowers piped with impossibly thin lines. Golden leaves glazed to shimmer. One shaped like a crescent moon dusted in pearl sugar. Stars. Swirls. Some geometric. Some floral. None store-bought. They were beautiful. Not beautiful in the way that feels mass-produced. Beautiful in the way that someone had sat, hour after hour, and focused on nothing but making something lovely. Corwin never baked a day in his life. He once called baking chemistry disguised as nostalgia. But here they were. I touched one gently, a soft blue iris, the icing firm under my fingertip. I didn't pick it up. I just looked. My eyes blurred for a second. I blinked fast, swallowed even faster. Then I saw the card. It was taped to the inside of the lid, tucked just so, held in place with a single square of blue tape. Same handwriting. Happy birthday, Mom. Maybe we can talk. Corwin. I stared at the words, read them twice, then 3 times, as if the shape of the letters might change under pressure. No apology, no punctuation, just that familiar crispness, like he couldn't bear to round his edges, even now. Maybe we can talk. My throat closed up. Not from sadness, not even anger. From the sheer weight of how long I'd waited to hear anything that sounded like wanting to come back. But I didn't trust it. Not yet. Maybe never. I closed the lid again, slowly, as if the cookies might crumble at the sound of doubt. The box stayed on the table. I stood there, alone in my kitchen, with a note that didn't say sorry and cookies I didn't ask for, and I whispered to the empty room. What changed, Corwin? What brought you back now? The question hung unanswered. I saved just one, not to eat, just to remember. I stared at the open box for a long time after I read the card. Maybe we can talk. Not, I miss you. Not, I'm sorry. Just the implication of a door left slightly ajar, with no promise it wouldn't slam shut again. I didn't know how to respond. Or if I should. Some silences calcify over time, they harden and grow sharp edges, and if you try to touch them again, they cut. I reached for the cookie shaped like a star. Pale gold, iced with a soft shimmer that caught the light like frost. It wasn't the prettiest, it wasn't the neatest, but something about it felt still, like it had been made for quiet hands. I didn't know why I picked that one, only that I couldn't let it go yet. I opened the Tupperware drawer and found a small square container, the kind usually reserved for leftover celery sticks or orphaned almonds. I slid the star-shaped cookie into it, closed the lid with a soft click, and placed it in the fridge. I wasn't planning to eat it, I just needed to keep one, as a placeholder. A question I hadn't figured out how to ask. The rest I couldn't keep them. Not in this house. Not after everything that hadn't been said between us. So I rewrapped them carefully. Re-tissue, re-ribbon. My hands moved on instinct. I tied the blue ribbon again, not the way Corwin had, but loosely, with softness. Not everything needed to be so tight. I thought of Euphemia. Euphemia Crane had been nothing but kind to me, even when things with Corwin and Maris fractured. Where others might have picked sides, she stayed above it. Never meddled, never judged. She still sent me Christmas cards, always handwritten. Never missed a birthday, even when her own daughter stopped calling. She loved cookies, always had. We used to laugh about it. Her guilty pleasure, she said, as if sugar were a scandal. I remembered once, after a particularly tense family dinner, how she'd pulled me aside and handed me a lemon shortbread. For surviving, she'd whispered. If anyone deserved something sweet, it was her. And maybe it was easier to give them away than to sit with what they might mean. The box sat on the passenger seat beside me, seat belted in. The drive to Euphemia's was short, just 15 minutes out along the East Road, where the trees arch low and the wind tugs at the tires like a curious child. By the time I turned into her driveway, the sun had started to slope downward, casting that familiar amber hue across her front yard. Her wind chimes were already catching the light breeze, ringing like old laughter. She opened the door before I knocked. She always did. "Idalia," she said, surprised, but smiling. "It's been a while." "It has," I nodded. "I brought something. A kind of birthday excess." I held out the box. "Oh, but," she began, hands up, polite protest loading behind her eyes. "They're just cookies, Euphemia, and I'd rather not keep them around the house. You always did have a better appetite than me." She laughed lightly, a little flustered, but took them. "Well, I certainly won't say no to cookies." I didn't stay long. She offered tea. I declined. She didn't press. As I left, she called out, "Happy birthday, Idalia. You look well." I turned back and smiled gently. "I'm still here," I said. "That counts." The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun slipped behind the trees. The porch creaked under my feet as I stepped back inside. Everything was the same: the folded towel on the counter, the unopened mail by the fruit bowl, the faint hum of the fridge. I stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the empty space on the table where the box had been, and I felt, what was it? Not regret, not relief either. Something in between. Something quieter. Like when you finally shut a book you've never been able to finish. I opened the fridge. The single cookie was still there in its plastic container, untouched, centered like it had been posed. I stared at it for a long time. Its shimmer had dulled slightly, but it still looked whole. Like it hadn't absorbed any of the doubt now thickening the air around it. I didn't know if it was a peace offering, a trap, or just an echo of something we used to be. All I knew was I had kept one. Not to eat. Just to remember. He sounded so normal, like nothing ever broke. The next morning began with rain. Not the dramatic kind that drums the roof like a warning, just a soft, persistent drizzle that settled over the town like a sigh. I stood in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, watching drops slide down the window in quiet races. The porch swing didn't move. Everything outside looked half erased. I didn't sleep much the night before. Dreams kept looping around Corwin's handwriting and the shimmer on the cookies. I'd wake every hour, not with fear, but with that disoriented sensation you get when your mind is still sorting itself out. The cookie I saved was still in the fridge, right where I left it. I hadn't touched the box. I hadn't even opened the container. Just knowing it was there felt like enough for now. I poured the coffee, black as always, and took it to the table. The quiet was heavier than usual. Not oppressive, just observant. Like the house was waiting for something too. The phone rang at 8:11 a.m. It startled me. No one calls that early unless it's a wrong number or a death. The name on the screen made my fingers go cold. Corwin Vance. I didn't move at first. Just stared at the glowing letters like they might explain themselves. I hadn't seen his name on my caller ID in over 4 years. I wasn't even sure the number would still work. I'd never deleted it, but I never dialed it either. The phone rang again. Then a third time. I picked it up just before the fourth. Hello? My voice came out more even than I expected. Hi, Mom, he said, casual, almost cheerful, like this was routine. I blinked. His voice hadn't changed. Still smooth, deliberate, faintly amused, as if everything he said had a second meaning tucked beneath it. Happy birthday, he added. A little late, I know. I didn't respond right away, just tightened my grip around the mug and sat down slowly. I got your package, I said finally. There was a beat, not quite hesitation, more like calculation. Yeah, he said. Wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I'd open it, honestly. Another pause, then a small chuckle. Fair enough. There was a quiet stretch. Not awkward, just suspended. Like we were both standing at the edge of something neither of us wanted to name. Then he asked, just a touch too lightly, so how were they? I glanced toward the fridge without meaning to. The cookies? Yeah. I took a breath. Held it. Let it out slowly. Oh, I didn't eat them, I said. Silence. The kind that cracks the air before a storm. I gave them to Euphemia, I continued, my tone as gentle as I could make it. She adores cookies. The line went dead quiet. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a moment, checked the screen. Still connected. Then, wait, what? It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Loud, sharp, panicked in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was 12, and dropped his science project down the sewer grate the day before the fair. I blinked, stunned. She's always been fond of sweets, I said carefully, and I didn't really know what to do with them. The silence that followed wasn't just cold. It was scorched. You gave them to Euphemia? He repeated, slower this time, but no calmer. Yes, I said. Yesterday afternoon. I drove them over. His breathing shifted tight, uneven, like someone trying very hard to stay composed and failing. You weren't supposed to do that, he said. I froze. I what? They weren't for her, he snapped. They were for you. Only you. His voice cracked, not from sadness, from something worse, something brittle and strained, like fury held together with paper. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought. Right. Of course you didn't, he said. The bitterness in his voice was thick, choking. You never do. And then, just like Faith hung up. No goodbye, no explanation, just the dial tone humming in my ear, low and steady, like the sound of a door being locked from the other side. I set the phone down slowly. My hand lingered on it. Outside, the rain picked up, whispering against the windows like something trying to be heard. Inside, I could still hear his voice echoing in my chest. They were for you, only you. I stood, walked to the fridge, and opened the door. The cookie sat in its container, still untouched. Its sugar crystals shimmered under the light, like it was waiting for something. I shut the door. Suddenly, I felt cold. You can hear urgency in a voice long before you know why it's there. The rain hadn't stopped. It was still coming down in thin, relentless sheets when I poured my second cup of coffee, though I hadn't finished the first. I wasn't really drinking it anymore, just holding it like a prop in a scene I didn't audition for. The phone call with Corwin kept looping in my head. You weren't supposed to do that. They were for you. Only you. His words had thorns on them, and now they were stuck in my chest. I stood by the window, watching the street remain empty. No joggers, no mail truck yet. Just the wind, moving trees that didn't care what day it was. Then the landline rang. The landline. Hardwired. Beige plastic. Dusty cord. It hadn't rung in months. Most people either texted or didn't bother. I froze mid-step. Just one ring and I already knew something wasn't right. You can hear urgency in a voice long before you know why it's there. I picked it up on the second ring. Hello? Idalia? It was Maris. Her voice was tight pressed in around the edges, like someone holding in more than they could afford to let out. Yes? It's Euphemia, she said, and that was all it took. My knees went soft. I sat down without meaning to. What happened? She collapsed this morning, Morris said quickly. Vomiting, disoriented. She couldn't stand. At first I thought maybe it was the flu, or vertigo, but it got worse. She didn't recognize me for a few minutes. She thought we were still living in our old house in St. Joseph. I closed my eyes. She's at the hospital? St. Catherine's. The ER ran some tests, but they're not finding anything conclusive. Her vitals are unstable, and they're calling in internal medicine. I felt the mug grow cold in my hands. She didn't have anything unusual to eat, did she? I asked, my voice already receding into itself. A pause. Not long, but meaningful. She mentioned the cookies, Maris said slowly. Said you brought them over yesterday. Yes, I swallowed. I did. Corwin sent them to me for my birthday. I didn't want to keep them. I thought she'd enjoy them. More silence. I could hear hospital noise in the background, beeping monitor, a voice over a loudspeaker, the distant squeak of rubber soles on tile. She only ate one, Maris said. Maybe two. But it was right after dinner last night. And this morning she just... I understand, I said quietly. Do you think... she began, then faltered. I mean, could the cookies have? I don't know, I said. And that was the truth. I didn't. But I was starting to wonder if I should have. If you think of anything at all, Maris said, her voice shaking now, please tell me. I will, I said. I promise. We hung up without saying goodbye. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. I stared at the phone in my hand for a full minute before placing it gently back on the receiver. Then I just sat there, in the half-light of the kitchen, while the storm outside pressed against the windows like it wanted in. Euphemia was kind, unfailingly kind. The idea that she could be in danger because of something I'd brought into her house made my stomach twist. I stood, slowly, walked to the fridge, opened the door. The cookie I kept was still there. The star. It didn't look sinister. It looked like a memory, like something handmade for a purpose I couldn't quite name. But now, it also looked like a question, or, worse, an answer. I stared at it for a long time, hand braced against the door handle. They were for you, only you. I remembered his voice, how it snapped, then cracked. I remembered the panic, the disbelief, the sharp fear poorly masked as anger. And suddenly, I didn't feel steady anymore. I closed the fridge and locked the door. I knew every bottle in my house except that one. I've always been particular about my kitchen. Not obsessive, just aware. Everything in its place. I may not entertain like I used to, but I still like to keep things tidy. The kind of tidy that whispers control, even when everything else is fraying at the seams. After Maris's call, I couldn't sit still. I moved through the house like a ghost rehearsing life. I folded dish towels that didn't need folding, wiped counters that were already clean, rearranged tea bags into alphabetical order. I even cleaned the inside of the microwave, something I usually reserve for full moon moods or the first cold snap of fall. The radio was on low in the background, but I couldn't tell you what was playing. Something with piano, or maybe it was just the sound of my own thoughts clanging softly in my chest. The trash can was nearly full. I pulled the bag up, ready to tie it, when something caught my eye. Near the bottom, just peeking out from under an eggshell carton, was a small, clear plastic bottle. I didn't recognize it. I paused, hand still twisted in the garbage bag, and stared down at it. No label, no markings, just a faint, ghostly ring of white residue clinging to the inside like fog on glass. I reached in slowly and pulled it out with 2 fingers. It was light, the kind of bottle vitamins come in, or over-the-counter painkillers. But this one was blank, sterile, out of place. I knew every bottle in my house. The dull orange of my calcium supplements, the amber one for my blood pressure, the green glass dropper bottle for the vanilla extract I never used. I could recite them all like a kitchen litany. But I didn't know this one. And that, more than anything, made my stomach drop. I turned it in my hand. The cap was screwed on tightly. I opened it carefully. No smell, no label tucked inside. Just that thin film of powder, chalky white. Not much, but enough. My first thought was, it came with the cookies. Tucked in the box, wrapped in tissue, discarded with the paper, the ribbon, the memory. He didn't expect me to look closely. Or maybe he did, and didn't care. I set the bottle on the counter and stepped back, like I was afraid it might move on its own. For a moment, I just stood there, hands on the edge of the sink, eyes fixed on the object like it had spoken. Something old and instinctive in me stirred. That low, maternal voice that once woke me before Corwin's fevers. The one that always knew when something was off, even when there were no symptoms. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also didn't want to be too late. I reached for my phone. Dr. Odile Morrow hadn't heard from me in over a decade. We'd served on the town's environmental health board together. She was a clinical toxicologist, brilliant, meticulous, and direct, in a way that never bothered me. I'd always liked her. She never played coy with bad news. Her number was still in my address book. I dialed. She picked up on the 4th ring. Odile. It's Idalia Vance. A pause, then a spark of recognition. Well, I'll be. I haven't heard your name in ages. Everything all right? Not exactly, I said. I have something I'd like you to look at. Quietly. There was a short silence. She didn't ask why, just said, what kind of something? A cookie, I said, voice low. And a bottle. No label. Just a white residue inside. Another pause, then, where are you right now? Home. I can meet you tomorrow morning. My private lab's behind the old medical plaza on Langston Road. Back entrance. Bring both items. Don't touch anything else. I haven't. Good. We exchanged no pleasantries. Just the essentials. That was Odile. After we hung up, I turned off the radio. The house fell into a stillness that didn't feel like mine. I looked at the bottle again, sitting there on the counter like a decision I hadn't made yet. I didn't throw it away. I didn't put it back in the trash. I placed it beside the refrigerator, next to the Tupperware holding the single cookie I had saved. And I sat at the kitchen table, my hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for someone to call my name. Corwin never forgot a slight. He just folded it neatly and filed it away. The bottle and the cookie sat on the kitchen counter like they belonged to someone else's life. I didn't touch them again that night, just moved around them, quietly, like a mourner circling a grave. I made tea I didn't drink. I turned off the porch light. I didn't check the locks twice like I usually do. I already knew sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I sat in the living room with only the hallway light on, the kind of dim glow that makes everything look like a faded photograph. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself remember things I'd trained myself to forget. Corwin wasn't a difficult child, not in the way people mean when they say difficult. He was quiet, observant, fiercely intelligent. The kind of kid teachers adored because he turned in extra work without being asked. The kind who always read the instructions 3 times before picking up a pencil. He kept his toy soldiers arranged by height. His pencils were always sharpened to identical points. He had a specific drawer for loose change, sorted by denomination, and if even one coin was out of place, he'd notice. At first, I called it focus, discipline. He liked order. So did his father. It didn't seem strange until it did. When he was 8, I rearranged the pantry. It had been one of those Saturday bursts of energy. I alphabetized the spices, moved the snacks to lower shelves, put the canned goods together by type. It made sense to me. But when Corwin came in and saw what I'd done, he stood in the doorway like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He didn't speak. Not then. Not later. Not for 2 full days. He passed me in silence, ate in silence, played in silence, and when I asked what was wrong, he simply looked at me with that blank, glassy stare he had when he was storing something. File it away, fold it up, save it for later. When he finally broke the silence, it was with a list, written in blue pen, taped to the inside of the pantry door. It said, "Please do not move things. Everything has a reason." He was 10 when I packed the wrong brand of juice in his lunchbox. I'd run out of the usual one and picked something close enough from the corner store. I found the bottle, unopened, sitting on the front step when I got home from work. No note, just the bottle, placed upright, clean, waiting. When he was 12, I made walnut cookies, a new recipe. He took one bite, then spat it directly into the sink, scrubbed his tongue with a paper towel until it bled. I apologized, panicked, but he wouldn't speak to me for a week. Not in words, at least. Just silence, sharpened into a weapon. Back then, I told myself he was sensitive, that it was my job to understand him. And he was never cruel, not in the ways people recognize. He didn't throw tantrums in public. He didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He controlled space, time, words. Controlled me with silence and precision. His punishments weren't loud, they were surgical. I thought he'd grow out of it, that adulthood would soften his corners. But the corners only got sharper. He studied finance, data modeling, risk analysis. Everything in his life had to be measurable, predictable. He liked formulas. He liked rules. He liked control. When his father got sick, Corwin didn't visit much. He said hospitals made him anxious. He preferred spreadsheets and scheduled check-ins. When I told him we needed to make decisions about the estate, he emailed back a 6-page document titled Post-Mortem Financial Strategy. The subject line read, "Asset Optimization After Loss." I told him that was cold. He said, "It's efficient." That was the last real conversation we had. Now, as I sat in the quiet, my arms crossed against a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, I thought about all the little things, all the forgotten rules I'd broken, all the silent offenses I hadn't realized were offenses. Corwin never forgot a slight. He just folded it neatly and filed it away. And then, one day, when the filing cabinet was full, he sent a box of cookies. My tea had gone cold. I didn't bother reheating it. I turned off the hallway light and walked to the kitchen. The bottle and the cookie were still there, unchanged, ordinary on the surface. But I was beginning to see the shape beneath the icing. And I was no longer sure who my son really was. I didn't need confirmation, but I needed it to be undeniable. The morning was colder than it should have been for early September. A breeze moved through the trees like it was warning them before shaking their leaves loose. I dressed in layers, even though I wouldn't be outside long. The cold wasn't in the air, it was in my chest. And no coat could fix that. I packed the cookie and the bottle like evidence. Not ceremoniously, just carefully. The plastic container fit snugly in a Ziploc bag, and the bottle I wrapped in a paper towel and slipped into an old tin box that used to hold sewing needles. I don't know why. It just felt right, like some part of me needed to bury it in something older, something neutral. The drive to the lab took 20 minutes. It was tucked behind a cluster of medical offices on Langston Road, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. A faded sign near the parking lot read, "Langston Diagnostic Group, appointments only." Dr. Odile Morrow was already waiting. She stood by the side door, arms folded over a white coat too clean for how early it was. Her silver hair was tied back. No makeup. Sensible shoes. Eyes that missed nothing. I parked but didn't turn the car off. She walked over and knocked on my window. I rolled it down. "Do you have them?" I handed her the Ziploc bag and the tin box. She looked at them briefly, then nodded. "I'll call when I have something. Might take a few hours." I hesitated. "You'll be discreet?" She gave me a look, not insulted, just sure of herself. Always. Then she turned and disappeared through the side entrance like she did this kind of thing every day. Maybe she did. I didn't drive away. I pulled into the far corner of the parking lot and sat with the engine running and the radio off. The vents blew lukewarm air that smelled faintly of dust. I folded my hands in my lap and tried not to look like I was waiting for a verdict. Because that's what it was. A verdict. I didn't need confirmation. But I needed it to be undeniable. That's the thing about suspicion, it blooms in silence. It spreads in the absence of proof. And until someone hands you something printed, signed, objective, you still have to live with the question. What if I'm wrong? But what if I'm not? I stared out the windshield, watching the wind push dry leaves across the pavement. The sky was gray, not heavy, just dull, like it hadn't decided whether to storm or clear up. It felt like everything was in that same in-between. I tried not to think about the cookie in the fridge, the one I didn't eat. But I couldn't help it. What if I had? I could see it. A slow afternoon. The kind where you finally give in to sentiment. You make tea. You open the box again. You tell yourself, maybe it really was just a gesture. You choose the gold star, the one you saved. You break it in half, just to test. And then? A headache, maybe. Dizziness. The slow unraveling of coherence. The world tilting quietly sideways. Your hands forgetting how to hold a mug. Your name disappearing from your own mind. Would Corwin have called? Would he have checked in? Or would he have waited, calmly, until someone else discovered you folded over, still warm, but fading? Would he have told people it was age? A heart issue? The strain of grief? Would anyone have suspected the cookies? I rubbed my forehead and leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, listened to the ticking of the car's engine and the steady rush of passing time. I didn't cry. I just felt hollow. Like the part of me that had carried motherhood as an identity had been scooped out and placed under a microscope, like love had curdled somewhere when I wasn't looking. I stayed there for over an hour. Odile didn't call. Not yet. I didn't expect her to know immediately. But I couldn't go home. I drove to the edge of the park, sat in the lot facing the duck pond, didn't get out, just watched a lone heron wade through the shallows like it had nowhere else to be. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the hallway light on, the same way I did when Corwin was a toddler and ran fevers that spiked after midnight. Back then, I stayed awake out of love. Now I stayed awake out of fear. And somewhere in between, I realized they had started to feel like the same thing. Monkshood. Deadly in the wrong dose. Rare. And intentional. The call came just after noon. I'd been sitting in the sunroom, though there wasn't much sun. Just overcast haze spilling through the windows like watered-down light. I hadn't touched the book in my lap. I'd turned the same page 3 times without reading it. The silence in the house felt different, now more attentive, like it was watching me. When the phone rang, I already knew who it was. Idalia? Odile's voice was calm, even. But something in the way she said my name made my throat tighten. I'm here. We ran the standard panels, she said, cutting to it. I had the lab go deeper once I saw what turned up. I sat up straighter, my hands curled into each other. There's something in the cookie, she said. Traces of an alkaloid compound, specifically Aconitum napellus. My mouth went dry. Aconitum, I repeated. Monkshood, she clarified. It's sometimes called wolfsbane. You might know it from old herbal folklore. Pretty purple flower. Entirely toxic. One of the more lethal plant-based poisons known to medicine. I didn't speak. I could hear the faint hum of her lab equipment behind her. Refrigeration units, maybe. Machines keeping things preserved and cataloged. Nothing in that room would lie to me. Symptoms vary, she continued, but it aligns with what you described about euphemia. Nausea, disorientation, fainting, eventually respiratory failure if enough is ingested. I closed my eyes, saw the cookie again in its Tupperware box, delicate and glimmering like a gift, a weapon dressed as a gesture. Odile, I said softly, is it possible this was accidental? Cross? Contamination? A trace amount from something else? There was a pause, not the kind that buys time, but the kind that prepares for finality. No, she said. This wasn't accidental. Monkshood isn't a pantry ingredient. It's hard to find, harder to extract, and not something someone just stumbles into. This was intentional, Idalia. Deliberate. My chest ached like I'd been holding my breath all morning. You said someone ate these? Yes. I didn't elaborate. I couldn't. She was quiet for a moment, then gently, would you like me to write up the report? It'll be discreet, unless you want to take it further. I looked at the phone in my hand, at the wrinkles along my knuckles, at the wedding band I still wore out of habit, long after Arthur passed. Yes, I said. Write it up. I hung up before I could change my mind. I didn't cry. Not then. There was a stillness inside me that held the tears back like a dam. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and stood in front of the refrigerator. Opened it. The cookie was still there. Nothing about it had changed, but everything around it had. Its frosting had dulled. The shimmer looked faded under the fridge light. But it sat perfectly intact, like it was waiting for my permission to destroy something. I shut the door slowly. Then I reached for the yellow pages I kept under the junk drawer. Most people don't use them anymore, but I never got rid of mine. I flipped to Police Department's Non-Emergency. My fingers paused over the number for the local precinct. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. Then I dialed. The woman who answered was polite, a little distracted. I told her I needed to speak to someone about a non-urgent but sensitive matter. Possible tampering with food. Potential poisoning. She transferred me to an officer. His voice was firmer, but not unfriendly. Do you have evidence? He asked. Yes, I said. And what makes you suspect poisoning? I hesitated. Then I said it for the first time in my head, not in a whisper, but aloud, as fact. Because I was the intended recipient, I said, and someone else ate what was meant for me. He didn't respond right away. Ma'am, he said carefully, we can't act without documentation. Do you have a lab report? One is being prepared. I can submit it when I receive it, along with the item in question. He asked my name, my address, said someone would be in contact. When I hung up, the house didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt complicit. I walked to the back door, unlocked it, and stood on the porch with the screen door open, letting in the late afternoon air. The breeze moved through me like a warning. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then nothing. It was done. The box had been opened. The test had been run. And now, someone else would know what I knew. He didn't need to shout. He'd already poisoned the room. Detective Ronan Vale arrived the next morning. Early, but not too early, 8:45 a.m. The kind of hour that says I respect your time, but I don't want to give you too much time to think. His knock was soft. 3 taps. Precise. He didn't wear a uniform. Slacks, button-down, dark windbreaker, a small leather notebook in one hand, and a badge he only flashed once before tucking it away. He looked young. Mid-30s maybe, calm eyes, the color of water when it's holding something underneath. I offered coffee. He declined, just asked if we could speak somewhere quiet. We sat in the sunroom. The light was soft that morning, gold-tinted and forgiving. It made everything seem less sharp than it actually was. He flipped open his notebook and clicked his pen once, then looked at me like he'd already drawn half a map and just needed to fill in the street names. I appreciate you reaching out, Ms. Vance. I nodded. He began simply. No pressure, just context. How long has it been since you and your son were in regular contact? 4 years, I said. There was a dispute over his father's estate. It ended with a lawyer. Vale scribbled something down. His handwriting was faster than Corwin's, but still neat. And the package? It arrived 2 mornings ago, on my birthday. He looked up. Was that unusual? Extremely. He nodded once. What did it contain? A box of cookies. Handmade, ornate, beautiful even. Any note? I nodded. A card, taped inside the lid. It said, Happy birthday, Mom. Maybe we can talk. Corwin. Did you eat them? No. Why not? I exhaled. Because I didn't trust the gesture. It felt abrupt, uncharacteristic. I kept one cookie in the fridge. The rest I gave away. Who to? Euphemia Crane. My son's mother-in-law. She's always been kind to me. Loves sweets. He paused. Scribbled again. Was she aware of the origin? I told her they were a birthday gift I didn't feel like keeping. I didn't mention Corwin by name. He didn't judge. He didn't nod either. Just listened. She's in the hospital now, I added. Yes, he said. We've been informed. He let a moment pass. No rush. Then, Miss Vance, do you believe your son meant to harm you? I looked down at my hands. I could have said, I'm not sure. Or I hope not. I could have wrapped it in doubt, dressed it in politeness, handed it over in softened phrases. But I'd spent too long giving Corwin the benefit of the doubt. I didn't owe him that anymore. I believe, I said slowly, that he wanted me gone. The method just caught up to the meaning. Detective Vale didn't write that part down. He just absorbed it. Do you still have the item you kept? I stood and walked to the kitchen. The cookie was still there, sealed in its little container. Next to it, the tin box with the unmarked bottle, both untouched since I'd moved them the first time. I placed them on the table like offerings. This is the cookie I didn't eat, I said. And this is the bottle I found in my trash the next day. I believe it was packaged with the box. He took out a small evidence pouch, gloved hands. He was careful not just in movement, but in demeanor. Nothing invasive, nothing rushed. He logged the items, labeled the bags, sealed them. Is there anything else? He asked. I thought about the card, the handwriting, the sentence pretending to be a truce. No, I said. Not yet. He rose. We'll keep you updated, and I'll be in contact personally if we need further details. I walked him to the door. The porch creaked under his feet like it did for everyone. Detective, I said as he stepped down. Yes? Do people ever confess when they do something like this? He looked at me for a moment, thoughtfully, not rehearsed. Sometimes, he said, but more often, they reveal themselves in smaller ways. I watched him leave. His car turned the corner and disappeared from view. When the door closed behind me, the house felt quiet again. But not empty. Not anymore. If he wanted to play Cold War, I'd bring fire. I dressed carefully that morning. Not for vanity, for clarity. Charcoal sweater, soft wool slacks, the small gold pin Arthur gave me on our last anniversary, simple, silent armor. I tucked the recorder into the inner pocket of my coat. It was no larger than a lipstick tube. One switch. No blinking light. No noise. I pressed it just before knocking on his door. If he wanted to play Cold War, I'd bring fire. Corwin answered like he hadn't shouted at me 3 days ago. Mom, he said, voice warm, composed. This is a surprise. He looked thinner, paler even. His button-down was perfectly pressed. His shoes were spotless, but something about him felt brittle, like he was holding himself together with angles. I heard about Euphemia, I said softly. I wanted to check in, see how she's doing. He stepped aside to let me in. Still at St. Catherine's, he said. Maris is with her. They think it's viral. Something sudden and odd. You know how hospitals are plenty of guesses, not many answers. His kitchen hadn't changed. Not a dish out of place. Counters wiped so clean they looked unused. A glass sat upside down on a drying mat, though it was already dry. The faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air like a staged photograph. You look well, he said. You always did like precision, I replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I moved through the kitchen slowly, deliberately, every movement casual, every step rehearsed. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more the other day, I said. The cookies were lovely. He raised an eyebrow. Were they? I didn't try them myself, I said. But Euphemia was thrilled. She said the green star-shaped one was her favorite. I watched him. He didn't react right away, just turned slightly to rinse the already dry glass under the faucet. Then, as he set it aside, he said without thinking, I thought she hated mint. I stood still, perfectly still. I didn't mention the flavor, I said calmly. There was the pause, the shift, barely a second, but it told me everything. His spine stiffened. He turned slowly, met my gaze. "Didn't you?" he asked, lightness forced. "Maybe I assumed she's always been odd about herbs, hasn't she?" "She didn't mention mint," I said again. "She just liked the shape." He opened the cabinet under the sink, pulled out a clean dishcloth, dried his hands. "I hope she's all right," he said too quickly. "It'd be a shame if," he caught himself, "if it was something serious." I let the silence stretch. "I didn't know you'd started baking," I said. "New hobby," he replied. "Stress relief. Good way to unwind." "Where'd you learn to use monk's hood?" The name landed like glass hitting tile. He froze. Not dramatically. Not with a gasp. Just went still. Like a switch flipped somewhere inside him and he was calculating. Recalibrating. "I don't know what that is," he said. "Too fast." "Dr. Morrow does," I said. He moved toward the counter again. Slowly. Carefully. "You went to Odile," he said, as if testing the name on his tongue. She ran the test, it was in the cookie. He placed the dishcloth down, perfectly folded. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, quieter now. "But accusations like that, they don't end well, especially without proof." "I think you've already given me enough," I said. "You slipped up." He stared at me, still. His face was unreadable, but behind his eyes something flickered. Calculation, maybe, or fear pretending to be boredom. "You've always misunderstood me," he said softly. "No," I said. "I think I finally understand you completely." I reached for my purse. My hand was steady. My heart wasn't. As I turned to leave, my eyes drifted to the far counter, near the spice rack. Just behind a folded tea towel, tucked neatly beside the mixer, was a small plastic bottle. Clear, unlabeled, identical in shape to the one I found in my kitchen trash. He noticed my glance and moved to block it, casually, as if stretching, as if nothing had shifted. "I should go," I said. "I've already taken up enough of your time." "Give Euphemia my best," he said, light again. I stepped outside into the cold. My lungs filled too fast. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't shiver. The phone in my pocket was still running. I didn't stop it until I was in my car with the doors locked and the engine humming beneath me. I sent the audio to Detective Vale before I could change my mind. Then I drove straight to the hospital. I left his house with the truth in my pocket and silence in my spine. I didn't drive fast. I didn't need to. What I had with me tucked into the lining of my coat, humming on a flash drive, wasn't urgent in the way sirens are urgent. It didn't blare. It didn't scream. It just existed, steady and cold, like something already decided. I parked outside St. Catherine's and sat in the car a moment longer than I meant to. My hand rested on the steering wheel. The keys dangled from the ignition, still humming. I hadn't turned the engine off. The heater clicked once, then settled into silence. My chest felt hollow. Not broken, just scraped clean. I reached for my phone. Opened the message thread with Detective Vale. No emoji, no small talk. Just the facts, the way he seemed to prefer. Audio attached. Date, time. Recorded voluntarily. I hit send. Then I sat there, blinking against the late afternoon light, until my eyes refocused on the sliding hospital doors ahead of me. Inside, the lobby smelled like plastic and faint lemon antiseptic. People moved in slow, purposeful lines, some with clipboards, others with haunted eyes. It was the kind of place that softened every sound, as if grief were easier to carry when muffled. I found Maris in the ICU waiting room. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled into a loose, uncertain bun. She wore a zip-up hoodie 2 sizes too big and held a paper cup of tea she hadn't sipped from. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She just stood slowly. "Is she awake?" I asked. She shook her head. "Briefly this morning. Incoherent. She's sedated again." I nodded. We sat together on the far bench, away from the muted television, away from the fidgeting man pacing by the vending machine. "I need to tell you something," I said after a long stretch of silence, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." Maris looked over at me. Her eyes were tired but alert, braced. I told her everything. Not in a rush, not in a whisper, just in sequence. The box, the card, the cookie I saved, Euphemia's reaction, the bottle in my trash, the test, the diagnosis, Corwin's slip, the bottle in his kitchen, the audio, all of it. She didn't interrupt. Not even once. But her hands began to shake about halfway through, and she set the cup down on the floor beside her feet like it had become too heavy to hold. When I was finished, I waited. At first, she just stared ahead, eyes fixed on a speck on the linoleum. Her mouth was slightly open, like she'd forgotten how to close it. Then very quietly she said, "I knew something was wrong." Her voice cracked, but only slightly, like a hairline fracture, a quiet, clean break. "I didn't want to know it," she continued, barely louder. "But I did." I stayed silent, let her speak. The unraveling had to come from her now. "I used to find notes," she said, "on his desk, formulas, chemical ratios. I thought it was just research, or maybe something for work. But sometimes the terms—" She stopped, swallowed. "I looked them up once. One of them was a sedative used in veterinary medicine. Another was some kind of rare alkaloid. I brought it up and he laughed, said I was watching too many thrillers." She shook her head. "He had jars in the basement," she said. "Dried plants, labeled in Latin. I thought it was a hobby, or something harmless. I didn't ask." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face. She didn't cry, not the way people expect. No sobs, no shaking, just stillness, too heavy to lift. "I thought he was just cold, analytical. But this—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I reached out and placed my hand gently on her back. She didn't flinch. She just leaned into it. After a while, she looked at me. Really looked. "I should have done something sooner." "No," I said quietly. "He was very good at hiding it." She nodded once. A slow, broken thing. We didn't speak again for several minutes. When I finally stood to leave, I looked down at her one last time. "Whatever happens next," I said, "you're not responsible for his choices." Her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't nod, but she didn't disagree. I walked out of the hospital with no real plan, just a sense of movement, a need to keep walking until the numbness stopped clinging to my joints. I had left his house with the truth in my pocket. Now, I delivered it. And the silence that followed was no longer my burden alone. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He folded like paper. It happened on a Tuesday. There was no warning, no formal announcement, no squad cars pulling up with lights flashing. Just a quiet call from Detective Vale at 9:17 a.m., while I was folding laundry and listening to the radio. "It's done," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. "Thank you," I replied. My voice didn't tremble. Not because I wasn't shaken, but because I had already done the trembling days ago. "He was compliant," Vale added. "Didn't argue, no lawyer present. Calm." "Calm." I said nothing. Vale paused, like he was waiting for me to ask a question. "When I didn't," he said, "I'll update you once he's been processed. In the meantime, the evidence is secure and in custody." He listed it, formally, like reading a grocery receipt. 1 cookie, preserved. 1 clear plastic bottle. Toxicology report from Langston Diagnostics. Audio recording, date stamped and authenticated. Chain of custody confirmed. I stared at the neatly folded dish towel in my hand. "Okay," I said, "that's enough." He understood. We hung up without goodbye. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty, not relieved, just weightless, like something had been unhooked from my ribs, like I could finally exhale, but didn't want to know yet. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge. The space where the cookie had been was still bare, like it hadn't decided what to fill itself with. The rest of the house looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, the news began to circulate. Not headlines, not TV reports, just whispers. An arrest made in connection to a suspected poisoning. A 38-year-old man taken into custody. No names at first. No photos. But this town's small. It doesn't take long. By Wednesday morning, Maris called me. Her voice was strained, but no longer breaking. They came to the house, she said. No shouting. No spectacle. He asked for a moment to change his shirt. And? He folded, she said. Like he always does when he's cornered. Like a paper swan. Polite. Precise. I pictured it perfectly. Corwin in his neatly pressed shirts, choosing the right collar, even for his arrest, saying nothing, offering no resistance, because for men like him, control wasn't about dominance. It was about silence, stillness, the ability to vanish emotionally before the consequences caught up. She told me he didn't ask about Euphemia, or me, or the baby photos tucked in the back of the bookshelf. He didn't even ask where he was being taken. He just turned, hands at his sides, and stepped into the back of the cruiser like it was a train boarding on schedule. I didn't visit the courthouse. I didn't need to see him behind glass, wearing someone else's suit, trying to reshape his face into the son I once knew. That version of him had already vanished long ago. Instead, I stayed home. I stood in the kitchen, watching the afternoon sun creep across the floor in pale gold lines. The wind outside pushed gently against the window panes. The porch swing moved without anyone on it. I boiled water, made tea, didn't drink it. I thought about the time Corwin was 6 and tried to build a trap in the backyard to catch birds. He'd read somewhere that bread crusts and patience were all you needed. He sat there for hours, unmoving, watching the string tied to a bent stick propped under a milk crate. No bird ever came, but he sat there until dusk, convinced stillness would earn him something. He learned early that silence had power. I just didn't know how much. Now, he would sit again. Different box. Different silence. No birds waiting to be caught, only consequences. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't always feel like thunder. Sometimes it's just a chair scraping against tile, and a name read in a low voice while paperwork changes hands. Corwin had been arrested. And I finally was no longer waiting for him to explain himself. I locked it in a fireproof case, not to punish, to remember what survival tastes like. The days moved slower after the arrest. Not heavy, not painful, just slower. Like time had taken a breath and was finally willing to wait with me instead of pushing me forward before I was ready. Ruth Euphemia woke 3 days after Corwin was taken in. Groggy, confused, soft around the edges, but alive. She didn't ask questions right away, and I didn't offer any. When I visited, we sat together in the hospital room without needing to explain why. The television stayed off. The flowers wilted politely. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, refreshing charts, but we stayed mostly in silence. One afternoon, she turned her head slowly and looked at me. "I don't remember much," she said, voice thin as thread. "Just a strange taste, something metallic." I nodded. "You don't need to remember." She gave a faint smile. "You kept one, didn't you?" I paused, then nodded again. "That's good," she whispered. "It's good to know we're still capable of doubt." We didn't talk about Corwin. Not then. But the silence between us had changed shape. It wasn't avoidance anymore. It was protection. I visited often, bringing tea in a thermos and crossword puzzles with the answers half filled in. Ruth liked finishing what I started. Said it made the world feel less abandoned. Maris was quieter, too, but stronger. She stayed close to Ruth, never missing a visiting hour. She didn't bring up her husband's name unless someone else did. And even then, she responded with stillness, not bitterness. A week after the arrest, she called me. "I've cut off contact," she said simply. "No letters, no calls. I'm having the locks changed." I didn't ask for details. She didn't offer them. It wasn't spite. It was self-preservation. "You did what you had to do," I said. "No," she replied. "You did what you had to do. I'm just following your lead." There was no pride in her voice, just a kind of weary reverence, the kind that comes after surviving something you haven't yet named. 2 days later, a padded envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Detective Vale. Sharp, efficient, but kind. Inside was a sealed evidence bag. And inside that one cookie. the star-shaped one I'd saved. Its icing dulled slightly, a faint shimmer still lingering on the edges, perfectly intact, a preserved relic from the edge of something dark. And tucked alongside it, a printed note in Vale's calm lettering. We're returning this per your request. The file is closed, no further action pending. Let us know if you need anything else. RV. I sat with the envelope for an hour before I opened it. I didn't need to touch the cookie. Seeing it was enough. I placed the evidence bag on the kitchen table, the same spot where the original box had once sat. Same wood grain. Same afternoon light. And then I stood. Walked to the hall closet. Opened the drawer beneath the linens. There, buried under old tax documents and insurance paperwork, was a small black fireproof box, the kind meant for passports, birth certificates, things you'd want protected when the rest of the world burned. I hadn't used it in years. I wiped off the dust, opened it, and placed the sealed cookie inside. Next to it, I added the card, the one from the lid of the box Corwin had sent. Happy birthday, Mom! Maybe we can talk. Corwin. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply closed the lid, locked the box, and slid it back into its place. Not to punish. To remember what survival tastes like. Sometimes survival is loud sirens, courtrooms, locked doors. But other times, it's quiet. A sealed cookie. A name on a card. A drawer that stays closed. That night, I didn't turn on the porch light. I sat by the window with tea and listened to the wind roll through the trees like water over stones. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, just aged, settled. I let the silence settle in my bones without fighting it. Because some stories don't need retelling. They just need remembering. And some gifts are meant to heal. Others remind you that you lived.